Welcome to Murfreesboro Storytellers, a bicentennial celebration. I'm John Hood, and I'll serve as your host for this series of programs each month. Our city, as you know, is celebrating its 200th birthday, and each month of this over-year-long celebration has a theme to showcase everything that has made Murfreesboro so special. Over the next several months, our program will cover a variety of topics, from our work to our music to so much more. This month, the theme for the bicentennial is Our Beginnings, and we'll be telling about the beginnings of Murfreesboro and those people who helped to make it what it is today. Our guests today are Ransom Jones, a local businessman, Greg Tucker, a retired attorney from Hospital Corporation of America and columnist for the Daily News Journal, and Jim Rich Roberts, retired from the Tennessee Air National Guard and a native of Rutherford County, as is Ransom Jones. The beginnings. Greg, you write a column for the Daily News Journal periodically, and you've done a lot of research about our beginnings. Start us off on how we got started. Last month we had the Hardy Murphy family, the William Lytle family, and the Thomas Rucker family here. But
those three families figure very prominently. I like to describe it as a very rough and rugged start.
Okay.
Because it began in controversy. As we know, the city of Jefferson originally was the county seat. But a lot of the big landowners, particularly those south of that area, upriver, so to speak, wanted to be able to benefit from the proximity of a county seat.
And you mentioned the river. That's one reason Jefferson was the county seat.
Right, Jefferson actually was the ideal location because the rivers were the main transportation routes. But it was about 4 or 5 years of lobbying the legislature and a lot of conflict, and finally they convinced the legislature that this county seat needed to be moved. And then those who had worked so hard to get to that point began to argue about who was going to get the county seat, where it was going to be. And it ended up in a very close vote after several months of politicking and rancor. And by one vote, they decided to favor what was offered by Captain Lytle. And it's interesting, if you read the deed that Captain Lytle signed, which of course involved no payment to him, but the deed recites that he acknowledges the great benefit that's going to accrue to him as a result of the placement on his property of the county seat. But then after they had divided up and sold off lots in what was to become Murfreesboro, just within a few years there developed a controversy between the Murphy family, descendants of Hardy Murphy, for whom it was named, and the Lytle, because about a third of what Lytle had given, or thought he had given, turned out to be some of the Murphy property. So we had about another 5 or 6 years while they sorted out, and finally the Hilliards, who were the son-in-law of Murphy, agreed to quit claim in exchange for a certain value that we haven't been able to figure out exactly what it was. But even then, they refused to give up their claim to what Lytle personally had kept out of that. So there was a continual controversy and struggle, which we shouldn't overlook, because that tells us much more about human nature and how things happen than to gloss it over and think everybody was in agreement on everything. But by 1818, Murfreesboro was pretty well settled and established, and I believe in 1817 it was actually incorporated as a city.
It ended in O-U-G-H at that time, is that right?
Yeah, I say it was Murfreesboro Ugg at that time.
Murfreesboro Ugg, right.
And that was actually determined by the state legislature, and to my knowledge, still officially in the annals of the Tennessee law, we should be Murfreesboro Ugg.
Maybe during the bicentennial we'll be able to get that officially changed.
That would be a clever thing to do.
I think we're going to do that with Mayor Tommy Bragg's help. Jim Rich Roberts, your family traces back here, the Richardson family and the Byrne family, right?
Right.
B-Y-R-N.
Yes.
Byrne family.
They came in 1815.
About the same time we're about to get started as Murfreesboro.
Right, and they started in Old Jefferson.
All right.
Then they moved in here some years after that.
Okay.
Have been here ever since.
I know for a time we had a bed and breakfast on East Main, the Byrne Roberts Inn. Now, that was your Roberts family
Yes.
Home originally?
Yes, that's where my mother was born and I grew up.
And your mother was a Byrne. Now, the Byrne family has a lot of legacy here. I remember Postmaster Byrne. I remember the Byrne Motor Company, and certainly even beyond that, farther back than that. Tell us more about the Byrne family.
The Byrne family, Charlie Byrne, Charles H. Byrne,
All right.
I'm told started the first automobile dealership in Rutherford County, which I have a picture of here that I can show you.
Good.
Funny thing about him, he owned that for years and years and never learned to drive, nor did his mother, his wife ever learn to drive. They had a chauffeur, and the day my grandmother died, she walked home from the square, but never did they learn to drive. I thought that was fairly humorous.
What dealership did they, what automobile
What
did they sell?
automobiles were they selling?
Yeah,
Well, this picture I have says Ford.
okay.
And it's up there next to where the Princess Theater used to be, between the theater and the library,
Okay.
the old library.
On College Street then?
On College
On
Street,
College
excuse
Street.
me. Yeah.
They're essentially where Pinnacle Bank is located present day,
Yes.
right along that corner.
And it
there.
went through and came out on Maple Street on the other side, and Roy Byrne
Okay.
owned that company, car company over on that side of town.
Which fronted on Maple Street. And I remember that
fronted
Byrne
on
Motor
Maple
Company
Street.
being on Maple Street, right.
It's a good location because that was a corner on the old Dixie Highway. So you
Which
had,
came right through downtown Murfreesboro.
and came in and made the turn right there and went a little bit east from there up East College.
Yeah, that was the route from Chicago to Florida back in those days.
Right by our home.
Right by the Byrne Robert, well, I should say the Roberts
Really
home.
tough near the end.
Yeah, right.
Trucks became quite prevalent those days.
I understand. Ransom Jones, your family traces back here in this community. Your dad came to Murfreesboro in the early 30s?
My father came to Murfreesboro in the 30s. He was a graduate of the University of Tennessee, electrical engineer, and he worked with the old Tennessee Power Company before it became TVA. Now, my mother was a Ransom, and in our family there are Ransoms, there's Snells, and even Maples. They go back a long way, and they've been active in the community and held a number of interesting positions. Back long ago when there was a county court, he was I believe they call it the president of the county court. He was the county judge.
County judge,
What
right.
they called at the time. There was another one as a country doctor. There were a couple of brothers that built one of the turnpikes in Rutherford County back in 1840, as Greg was telling me a while ago.
Which turnpike would that be? Is that
That was connecting Eagleville and Salem. Eagleville at the time was in Williamson County
okay?
and had tried for several years to get a turnpike to Franklin and could not find, of course, all the turnpikes then were built with private money.
Right.
Couldn't find the investors. And the Ransom brothers stepped up and said, we'll build a turnpike Eagleville to Salem. Subsequently, Eagleville petitioned to be included in Rutherford County because that's what all the business and contacts were at the time.
As I recall, Eagleville was originally called Manchester, wasn't it? And then later the name was changed to Eagleville.
I'm not aware of that. That's
That's one
interesting.
of the stories that I recall from somewhere.
Is that right? I'll check you on that.
Ransom was your family, your mother's family, the ones that had the Ransom gin?
That was part of the Ransom family. And the Ransoms were quite prominent at one time, and quite a number of them.
Right.
But they're just about all gone now. And my namesake was Will Ransom, and he died back in the early 50s.
I mentioned gin. Cotton was quite a product back in those days. When we had several gins here, as I recall.
It certainly was, and as a child, I can remember the gins, and I can remember that they caught on fire on a regular basis, too. Right. I can remember watching the fire department put out a fire down at one of the gins. And those gins stayed around for a long time, and I remember when they were torn down to build City Hall, was it?
Some were down in that area.
Yeah.
Could very well have
Some
been.
were in the bottoms area.
In the bottoms area,
Yeah,
right.
over
which
that
was, that
direction.
reclamation project brought it back. Now, your dad served as mayor.
He did. My father served in World War II. He came out as a lieutenant colonel. He was elected mayor of Murfreesboro, served a term, and he was involved in quite a number of businesses and various kind of activities, and he passed away about 5 years ago.
Great part of the community. I remember him from MacArthur Day, April 30th, 1951, when the general brought his bride back to Murfreesboro.
That was quite an occasion. And I was a child, I remember it, but I remember it well, and there's some old pictures around. I think the Limbaugh Library has the pictures that Life magazine took that they did not use were eventually mailed to my father, and he gave them to the Limbaugh Library.
I remember that. As a matter of fact, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution Sunday edition front page is a color photo of the platform at Horace Jones Field with your dad, and Gordon Browning was the governor, I believe, the general and his lady, all on the platform. Quite a day for Murfreesboro. I remember your dad, I think when he was mayor, had something to do with getting not Jones Boulevard, but Rutherford Boulevard built.
He was very much involved in the road construction and traffic patterns around Murfreesboro. He flew a light plane. He learned to fly, and he went out to the airport. He rented a plane. He'd fly around. He'd watch the traffic, and he could tell where a needed road needed to be constructed. And so from that, he proposed several of these roads around Murfreesboro that have been built and been important to the community.
I remember at that time everybody said, a road out that far from Murfreesboro? What a wonderful addition it was that he was so far ahead of typical planning, I think.
Absolutely. He was also chairman of the State Planning Commission at one time.
Not surprisingly. Okay, very good. Greg, getting back to the early days of Murfreesboro, you brought with you a map that shows a layout of downtown Murfreesboro. Tell us about that.
After the decision was made in about April of 1812 to accept the donation of land from Lytle, the next step, one of the 7 commissioners that was involved in the decision was a surveyor, and he was contracted to lay out the 60 acres around a central court square. And
no courthouse then, but
yeah, nothing there. In fact, it was raw land. There was very little there at all. The actual settlement area of the plantation that this was originally part of was back over here, which would be about where we talk about the Carnation milk plant and all. That's where the center of the plantation was. And then some of the Hardy plantation area was been down this direction, back behind what is now the Discovery Center. This corner right here is easy to locate because they decided that the mouth of Town Creek, which some of us know as the Murphy Branch, where it would float into the Lytle Creek, would be the starting point. And they surveyed from that point. You can see that's laid out as lot number 1. And the last lot was over where we know now as the block that the old city cemetery was in. And the commissioners were charged with laying it out and then selling all these numbered lots in order to raise money to build the courthouse. And the act about building the courthouse said, and also to build the stocks and the whipping post. Right there on the county square, right on the square. And what's interesting is, you know, we think of those kind of disciplines, and where was the gallows? Well, they stopped short of that. A gallows was built only when it was needed.
I see, and then dismantled.
So yeah, the first gallows was built in 1813, and they didn't need another one until 1819. And when they did build the first gallows, they put it right up where, well, for those of us that know the area, we now have a little bus system, the Rover. Approximately where the Rover terminal is was the first place where
right behind where Dr. Sam Hay used to have an office.
That's right, right in that area, right off of what used to be the original high school property in there.
A few years ago, there was some renovation around the courthouse, and a well was discovered up there. Do you know about the well?
Well, yeah, and
north side of the courthouse.
Yeah, it was a hand-dug well, which is on the north side. Which, at the time that they found it, then someone built the rock around it and marked it, and I'm glad it was marked. But of course, the real water source was the Murphy and the Sand Springs, down in what we now call the wetlands, besides the Discovery Center. Those wetlands are not primordial. They were created by man. There were 2 springs, but there actually was a rise there, and it was solid rock. And to build the courthouse and some of the early buildings, they quarried out all that rock in there and ended up as a good place to dump all of our storm drainage and such as that, and it created the wetlands.
What about Lot 53?
Lot 53 is a story that we still don't know all the details, but Lytle's one compensation for giving the 60 acres is he says, I want to keep one lot, my choice. And he chose a prime corner right off the courthouse square, a lot that now are county offices, and most of us know it as the Goldstein's lot. Right. And that was a lot he was going to develop, and probably as a result of this, that lot itself was worth more than the whole 60 acres before the city was planned. Unfortunately for Lytle, it ended up that a line of about through the southern side of the square was the part that was on Murphy's property, as they discovered later. So Hardy Murphy's son-in-law, Isaac Hilliard, apparently played hardball with him and would not quit playing back to him. And we've yet to know. I hope I can figure out eventually from the county records how that finally worked out. But Hilliard demonstrated that, and it was not unusual. All these were originally land grants, Revolutionary War land grants, and they overlapped. And sometimes they left gaps in between. In fact, some of the surveyors, one of them by the name of Griffith Rutherford, made himself rich by claiming the gaps that he found as a surveyor. He and his son were both surveyors working this area.
So is that how he got known in what is now Rutherford County?
Yeah, he was never here, but he actually owns quite a bit of property by claiming and you know, the gaps between the Revolutionary grants and such.
Tell us some stories of your family's historical bits or amusing incidents of things that have happened. You tell me about, was it your aunt who told you a lot of stories about the family?
Oh yeah, they they have old folklore that they put out for people, and they'll tell you something, but when the end comes, it's not quite like it was.
I understand.
Came out to be,
Yeah,
as a
okay.
matter of fact.
For instance?
My great-grandfather, James Richardson, the man I'm named for.
By the way, is he the one for whom the plaque is mounted on East Main Street?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes. First of all, he was a congressman for 20 years and retired to become the head Mason in the world at one time.
And that's on that plaque, I believe,
On that
about
plaque,
his masonry,
yes,
right?
it is. And he was in the state house and the state senate, and he came back from the war as a first lieutenant. But his title was adjutant, major adjutant. Yeah.
All right,
And so that's a title, not a rank.
right.
So they all called him Major just because he was in law partnership with a General Palmer. It seemed kind of ridiculous to have a lieutenant and a general in the same office, so they raised his rank to major. That's what I figured anyway.
No fraternization.
Yeah, yeah, that's right, exactly so. And he and General Palmer were law partners until General Palmer's son, Horace, became a lawyer. Then they went one way in an office, and James Richardson and John Richardson, who were brothers, became partners in another law firm.
Okay.
And John Richardson became a judge, Judge Richardson, and he lived to 1940. I knew him. He was born before the Civil War,
Okay.
a long time.
Now, some of your family was prominent in the history of Oakland's. Isn't that the case?
I'll tell you a quick story.
Hmm.
My grandfather Roberts bought Oakland's with nobody ever seen it but him, his wife, kids, no one. They came down with a driver with the whole crowd in the car. They didn't know how to get to Oakland's. So they stopped down here on Manny Avenue in Maine,
Right.
and my mother was playing croquet in the side yard. And the kid stuck his head out of the window and said, "Hey, how do you get to Oak Manor?" was what he was
Oak
called
Manor,
then.
right.
She said, "I'll just go all the way to the end of that street." And that was my father to be that asked my mother to be
For goodness sake.
what the question was. I thought that was fairly humorous.
Interesting, yeah.
And they bought it in.
How did they finally get together?
I don't know that I ever got around to asking.
But they did. That's
They
what's
did.
important. Okay.
Yeah, they were
must
about
have.
13 years old at the
Yeah,
time.
okay.
They went out there and bought it, I think, I believe it was 1914, but it may have been 1913, I think.
Who were they buying it from?
Darrah's.
The Darrah family, yeah.
Now,
okay.
the Darrahs didn't like living in the country, so they came and built in the 400 block
On East Main. Yeah.
on East Main
Yeah.
Street. Last house on the right.
Right.
Bubba Hudson now
Yeah,
owns that
right.
piece of property.
Yeah, that was that. I grew up knowing that as the Darrah home.
Darrah home.
Didn't know anything about the Darrahs. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but they didn't like living in the country.
Yeah, so it moved to town.
Moved to town. That's right.
Ransom, what's your favorite recollection or reminiscence about the family? And
Well, you know, really, my father came here in the 30s, so he didn't have any real connection here. My mother, her father died when she was an infant, That was about, what, 1902 or something.
Okay.
And then later on, her mother died from cancer when she was, I believe, 17.
Mm.
So there are really not any particularly humorous stories that were passed on in our family. I know a number of humorous stories about other folks, but not so much my own.
Maybe for another day. Huh?
Perhaps so. Some quite humorous stories.
Tell me about your father working with the Tennessee Electric Power Company.
Well, that was interesting. He came to Murfreesboro after graduating from the University of Tennessee as an electrical engineer. Went to work with Tennessee Power. And his job was to go out, and you have to understand, in Rutherford County was mostly rural. It was Murfreesboro, small town, mostly rural.
Farmland, yeah.
Farmland. So his job was to go up out various country roads. They all were country roads, and sell power. And he'd go door to door. Said, well, he's from Tennessee Power, and we want to build an electric line. We've got to sign up a number of customers before we can build it. And so they were mostly pretty receptive because they wanted lights.
Wanted lights.
Wanted lights. And he'd talk to them about it, and he says, well, now, what about maybe a refrigerator? And they'd say, no, just lights, just lights. So he would get the customer signed up, build the line, and they would hook on. Well, it wouldn't be long before they would see people with refrigerators. And it wasn't long before they'd have to have a refrigerator. And then another thing that they would have to have was a washing machine.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the old days, you'd see these washing machines out on the front porch. Well, that was a status symbol, to see a washing machine. So, of course, nowadays, people have, it's just incredible how much the expansion has been in consumption of electrical power and how many devices there are. It was, but it's a story that he tells, told quite often.
And that eventually became Middle Tennessee Electric Membership Corporation.
I believe
right?
so. Actually, Tennessee Power, I
Well,
believe, was TVA. They took over generating the power. See, Tennessee Power Company had a generating facility at Walter Hill, at that dam out there.
That's right. I remember that old framework of that old building.
That's
was
right.
there for
And
many
so
years.
Tennessee Power Company then became part of TVA, and then, of course, later on Murfreesboro Electric and Middle Tennessee Electric Power Cooperative.
And that wasn't an easy transition either. There was a period there when there was quite a political fight between Tennessee Electric Power, which of course was originally based in Chattanooga and had lines serving through the area, and TVA and the rural co-ops.
Oh, okay.
And the rural co-ops, of course, wanted to buy from TVA, getting cheaper power. And literally it put the squeeze on, it was called TEPCO by a lot of people, Tennessee Electric Power Company. And TEPCO eventually threw in the towel, but only after a period of 5 or 6 years where they fought politically to keep these rural cooperatives from forming. And Knox Hutchison, which many of us remember, or at least remember his family, led the fight to bring in the cheap TVA power through these co-ops. Not so much for Murfreesboro, but for the surrounding rural areas. And then, of course, eventually Murfreesboro Electric bought also from TVA and took advantage of the same lower rates.
To back you up on this being a country county, rural county, in 1940 there were 8,000 people in Murfreesboro
Right.
and 32,000 people in the county.
In the county.
And just a few years before that, it was even worse.
So it sort of changed a bit over the years. I remember coming to the what was in the Rutherford County Quarterly Court, now Commission, back in 1968. There were 42 members of the commission, and 4 of them were from Murfreesboro. The other 38 were from out in the rural area, and that's when Dr. Sam Ingram and Dr. Earl Hinton initiated the one-man, one-vote suit and changed that around. So that was part of the transition from a rural county, if you will, to more of an urban community. Tell us more. What other research you've done, Greg, about our community, our city?
I'm reminded that the reference to Tennessee Power. In the 20s and 30s, the Boy Scouts were very prominent in the area. They still are, but almost every young man in Murfreesboro, this was not so popular out in the county, but in Murfreesboro, and there were some scout leaders who wanted to build a scout camp for Rutherford County Scouts. And one of the key men in the scout organization at the time was the head of the TEPCO local, or one of the seniors.
Okay.
And he scouted around and decided that some property owned by one of my favorite characters, Guy James Sr., out towards Halls Hill would be ideal for the camp. So he went out to Guy's place and sat down with the fella and told him what he wanted to do. And Guy James was something of a negotiator, and he said, well, yeah, if you'll bring electricity out here to my farm, which of course would be available then for the scout camp, I'll give you access to that property. And they built the first scout camp in this area, way ahead of the Middle Tennessee that's now,
Boxville.
Boxville and all that, out on that farm. And for a decade or so, Guy James had the only electricity in that eastern part of the county because of the deal he made. And eventually, when the scouts moved on to other facilities, I believe the Sportsman's Club was the first to use that property, which is now over here on Stones River. And it was used quite a bit. But again, that came out of that struggle where TEPCO was trying to maintain its dominance in the
Didn't realize
area.
that connection. I remember the Boy Scout camp and know the location now. Okay.
The land that Guy James gave was the worst piece of land in Rutherford County.
Was what?
Worst piece.
Worst piece of land. Okay.
Cedar trees,
Yeah.
ticks, and sugars. I went out there. You'd come home covered up with them.
Yeah.
Well, now you just described about 2/3 of the county.
But look at,
I still own some of that.
look at what's happened to the Guy James farm, at least part of it
Oh,
now,
yeah.
with the MTSU dairy operation.
Just last week they
unveiled,
opened that.
$4.4
Oh
million
yeah,
installation.
beautiful.
This
State of the
part,
art.
solid rock. You're not going to grow anything but cedar trees on
I
that
think
land.
you're correct.
It did touch the Stones River, though, I'll tell you.
Wrapping up our discussion, any recollections that come to mind, Ransom, you'd like to share as we wind up?
Most of my recollections don't go back really far
I
enough,
understand.
really. But
Still part of the history of Murfreesboro.
you know, I can tell you a little story about a couple of Murfreesboro citizens, Judge Wiley Holloway and Carl Russell.
All right. Okay.
Well, in 1941, my father had been called to active duty. We could see that World War II was coming on, and we had virtually no military at all. So we started this build-up, and he was an ROTC graduate, and so he was at the time he's probably a captain. And his job, he'd been called to active duty, was to go around the country with a cadre of others to stand up new training bases.
Okay.
So he was standing a base up and then bring the first class in, and then they'd move on. So it was in, I think it's over in Arkansas. There was a base over there, and he looked out in this line of incoming recruits, and he saw Carl Russell and Wiley Holloway. And of course, they were, 20 years old at the time or whatever. And he had known them from Murfreesboro because he had lived here. So he went over to see them, and they were glad to see each other. And he said, well, boys, I'm going to let you do whatever you want in the military. Just name it. What do you want to do? Well, Wiley Holloway says, I want to shoot the biggest gun the Army's got. So he said, so be it, you'll be in the artillery. And he was. He served in the artillery. Well, Carl Russell said, Carl, what do you want to do? Carl Russell said, I want to ride a motorcycle. So, sure enough, he made him an MP, and he rode a motorcycle in World War II.
Good story. Thank you very much.
Let me-
Jim, Rich, quickly, we're about out of time.
My great-grandfather was in Congress from '85 until 1905
Okay.
and put a bill in to buy the land to have the cemetery, not the cemetery, but the what am I trying to say?
The National Cemetery.
National
out at
Cemetery.
the old battlefield.
And it took him, he had a price that was really cheap, and he had about 2 or 3 times as much land, but it took him 30 years to pass that bill. I think 1926, and they got a little bit of land for a lot of money. But he
Finally got it
started
done.
that.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much. We've run out of time. Appreciate you being with us today. Ransom Jones, Greg Tucker, Jim Rich Roberts have our discussion about the beginnings of Murfreesboro. Next month, we'll continue to look at the early days of Murfreesboro, as the bicentennial theme is about our educators. Please take a moment to participate in and enjoy the many activities scheduled for our bicentennial celebration. For more information about what's happening throughout Murfreesboro, you can call our city's Parks and Recreation Department at 890-5333 or visit www.murfreesborotn.gov. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next month for another episode of Murfreesboro Storytellers, a bicentennial celebration.